Imagine this. Moscow. The same city, really, that felt the sting of that Soviet defeat back in Afghanistan. Now, extending a hand. Not exactly friendship, maybe, but, well, a kind of pragmatic partnership.
Yeah, to the very group that, played a big part in that defeat. It's quite something.
It really is. And that brings us to today's deep dive. We're looking at this pretty head-turning news out of Russia. The Supreme Court decision,
Hmm.
April 17th, 2025, taking the Taliban off their list of terrorist organizations.
Right. You shared some fascinating stuff on this, the official announcement, some really sharp analysis trying to make sense of it all. It's definitely unexpected for many.
Exactly. So our goal today, let's unpack what this actually means for the region, for international relations, and maybe most importantly, for Afghanistan's future. We want to give you a clear picture, something beyond just the headline.
Okay, let's start with the scene itself. It's almost cinematic, isn't it? Moscow Supreme Court. Imposing building.
Yeah.
April 17th, 2025. You've got Judge Oleg Nefedov,
Yeah.
and he delivers the verdict, basically, suspension of the ban. The Taliban are no longer, legally speaking for Russia, a terrorist group.
And the news hit fast, right? TAS was all over it.
Oh, immediately.
Yeah.
And the decision was effective, like right then and there. So the impact is instantaneous, legally speaking.
Okay, but let's be super clear here. This isn't Russia suddenly saying, okay, Taliban, you're the official government, let's exchange ambassadors. It's not that.
No, absolutely not. That's a critical distinction. Think of it like this decision lets you have a business meeting. Formal recognition is like inviting them for a state dinner, right? Totally different level.
Right. So what does it do practically?
Well, it basically clears the legal path. Russian officials can now meet with Taliban reps, have formal talks, invite them to conferences, economic forums, that kind of thing.
Without breaking their own laws.
Exactly. Without that legal awkwardness or, potential prosecution hanging over them, it just smooths the way for practical engagement.
Which leads us to the backstory. Because like you said, this wasn't completely out of the blue. There were signs, weren't there? These meetings.
Definitely, yeah. This decision didn't happen in a vacuum. There's been this pattern building. You look at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum.
SBEF, yeah.
Right. The Taliban were there, not just once, but in 2022 and 2024.
Yeah.
Those are pretty high-profile international gatherings.
Significant platforms. And it wasn't just like a low-level presence either. Their top diplomat met Lavrov, right? Russia's foreign minister.
Yes, Sergei Lavrov. In Moscow, October 2024. That's a serious, high-level meeting. It signals.
What?
It signals something is shifting, even if cautiously.
Public meetings, too. Not hidden away. It feels like they were maybe testing the waters, signaling a change.
Could be. I mean, it certainly raises the big question, why? Why now? What's driving this shift from Russia's perspective?
Okay, let's dig into that why. Because going from terrorist group to, well, potential partner requires some pretty strong reasons. It feels like pragmatism is the key word here. Geopolitics.
Absolutely. And you almost have to, rewind the tape a bit. The history here is just dripping with irony.
Uh-huh. The Soviet-Afghan War. The 80s.
Right. The Mujahideen fighters, who the Taliban largely came from later in '94, they were instrumental in that Soviet withdrawal, a real humbling experience for Moscow.
A withdrawal, some say, even contributed to the Soviet Union's collapse. So, deep history there. But fast forward to 2003, Russia does put the Taliban on the terrorist list. Why then?
Well, the main reason back then was the Taliban's connection to separatists in Russia's own North Caucasus region, Chechnya, places like that. That was seen as a direct threat to Russia's security, its, territorial integrity.
Okay, that makes sense. Direct threat. But then the chessboard gets flipped, right? August 2021, U.S. and NATO pull out, Taliban sweep back into power.
Exactly. And that changes everything from Moscow's point of view. Suddenly there's this huge power vacuum right in their strategic backyard, Central Asia.
And Russia sees not just chaos, but maybe an opportunity, or at least a situation they need to manage differently. And economics seem like a huge part of that calculation.
Oh, definitely. There's this long-held Russian ambition, really, to use Afghanistan as a transit route, specifically for natural gas heading south towards Southeast Asia.
A pipeline through Afghanistan. That would be massive economically and strategically.
Huge. Think about the leverage. And it's telling, isn't it, that Russia was actually the first country to open a proper business office in Kabul after the Taliban takeover in 2021.
Wow, okay. That's a clear signal of intent.
Yeah, staking a claim, basically. And it's not just about gas transit. Afghanistan has, significant mineral wealth, largely untapped. Russia is interested in accessing those resources, boosting trade, and just generally cementing its influence in the whole region.
So Pipelines, resources, regional influence, but there's another piece too, isn't there? A shared enemy.
Yes, and this seems really crucial. Both Russia and the Taliban see the Islamic State Khorasan, ISK, as a major threat, a destabilizing force.
ISK. They've been responsible for some horrific attacks, including the one in Moscow. March 2024, the concert hall.
That horrific attack, yeah.
Yeah.
Over 140 people killed. That event likely had a massive impact on Russian thinking. It brought the threat home in a very brutal way.
You'd have to assume so. And didn't Putin himself make a statement around that time?
He did. July 2024, he actually called the Taliban allies in the fight against terrorism, which, given the history we just talked about, is, well, it's a stunning turnaround in language.
Allies. Wow. That really underlines the pragmatic shift. Okay, common enemy number one is ISK.
Seems that way. The enemy of my enemy, right? Even if your enemy used to be,
Yeah.
well, your enemy.
And Russia isn't entirely alone in rethinking its stance, is it? Other neighbors are also adjusting.
That's right. Look at Kazakhstan. They actually removed the Taliban's terrorist designation back in 2023. So Russia isn't the first in the region to make this kind of move.
Interesting. So maybe a bit of a regional trend towards engagement.
Yeah.
In China, they're obviously a huge player there too.
China's heavily involved, yeah. They appointed a new ambassador to Kabul in 2023. Their economic ties are growing. Belt and Road Initiative considerations, resource interests, they're definitely engaged.
But no one has officially recognized the Taliban government yet.
Right. Correct. Zero formal recognition from any country.
Yeah.
That's still a major line that hasn't been crossed.
And the reasons are pretty clear and, frankly, disturbing. The Taliban's laws, their interpretation of Islamic law, especially the restrictions on women and girls.
Exactly. Banning girls from education past 6th grade, blocking women from most jobs, from public parks. I mean, these are fundamental human rights issues.
Yeah.
And the international community is, quite rightly, deeply concerned.
Makes formal recognition politically toxic for most governments.
Pretty much untenable, yeah. But as we're seeing, pragmatism often finds a way. Geopolitics and national interest can sometimes outweigh those principled stands, at least in terms of practical engagement.
So, flipping it around, how does this look from the Taliban's point of view? This Russian decision must feel like a big win.
Oh, absolutely. It's a significant step towards the international legitimacy they crave. They desperately want to be seen as the legitimate government of Afghanistan.
I saw one analyst, Michael Kugelman, call it a win-win. Security cooperation for Russia, a step towards recognition for the Taliban.
That sums it up pretty well. Both sides get something they want out of this, at least in the short term.
But another analyst, Ibrahim Bahis, added a note of caution, right? Saying this is more about making business possible under Russian law, not necessarily deep trust or full acceptance.
Yeah, that's a good reality check.
Mhm.
It's about removing legal barriers to practical stuff, trade, talks, security coordination maybe.
Sure.
It doesn't suddenly mean Russia trusts the Taliban implicitly or agrees with their ideology. It's transactional.
Still, the irony is just unavoidable, isn't it? Russia fought these guys, or the groups they sprang from, labeled them terrorists. Now they're working with them.
It's a stark reminder of how changeable international relations can be. Yesterday's enemy can become today's, well, pragmatic necessity.
And could this set a precedent? You mentioned Kazakhstan, but what about others? Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, they share borders, history.
You'll be watching very closely, no doubt. Moscow's move might embolden them, or at least make them reassess their own level of engagement with Kabul. It changes the regional calculus.
But while all this high-level diplomacy and strategic maneuvering is happening, the situation on the ground for many Afghans, especially women, remains dire. That can't get lost in the shuffle.
Absolutely crucial point. The human rights situation, particularly for women and girls, is appalling. We don't have geopolitics, but we have to remember the human cost.
Yeah. On the other hand, there's this argument, maybe engagement, even with a regime like the Taliban, is better than isolation. Could it lead to some stability?
That's the counterargument, yes. That stability, even under the Taliban, might be the least bad option to prevent state collapse, reduce refugee flows, maybe limit drug trafficking, and contain groups like ISK more effectively.
A hold your nose and engages strategy, perhaps.
Something like that. The hope being that engagement might, over time, moderate behavior, or at least prevent things from getting even worse. China's economic presence sort of plays into that, too. They want stability for their investments. It's a complex web.
And the Taliban themselves, have they really changed since the 90s? They talk a different game sometimes, PR-wise.
They've definitely put effort into their public relations since taking power in 2021. Promises of a softer rule, outreach.
But the actions, especially towards women.
The actions tell a different story, don't they? The severe restrictions remain firmly in place. So while they engage diplomatically and focus on fighting ISK, which helps their image, their core domestic policies haven't fundamentally shifted in the ways the international community hoped.
So tying this back to Russia's strategy, it's not just about Afghanistan, is it? It's bigger.
No, it fits into Russia's broader goals. They have decades of history, painful history, but experience nonetheless in Afghanistan. This move is part of asserting their influence in Central Asia again, showing they're still a major player.
Sending a message? To the U.S., maybe? To China?
Yeah, partly. Demonstrating relevance. Showing they can forge partnerships, even unlikely ones, to secure their interest in a region where U.S. influence has waned.
And they've pledged humanitarian aid too, right? How does that fit in?
Well, partly it's about image, showing concern, but it's also pragmatic. Preventing a total humanitarian catastrophe in Afghanistan is arguably in Russia's interest, too, to avoid more instability spilling over its borders or into neighboring states.
Which brings us back full circle almost to the human cost, because amidst all the strategic games.
It's the Afghan people who are living the reality, especially the women and girls. That statistic, 1.4 million girls denied education beyond primary school, is just devastating.
And Russia's decision, this delisting, while it might help trade or talks, it doesn't directly change that reality, does it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't address the fundamental human rights issues at all. It leaves the world grappling with this awful dilemma. How do you deal with this regime? Do you isolate them and risk state collapse and more suffering? Or do you engage and risk legitimizing their practices?
No easy answers there.
None at all. And Russia's move just adds another layer of complexity to that challenge.
So wrapping up our deep dive then, Russia taking the Taliban off the terror list, it's clearly a major geopolitical shift, driven by, well, a mix of things. Security worries about ISK, economic ambitions, and just strategic positioning in Central Asia.
Yeah, it's rooted in pragmatism, in what Moscow sees as its national interest, much more than any kind of ideological alignment or change of heart about the Taliban values.
So very uncertain. Will this lead to deeper cooperation? What are the real long-term impacts for the region, for the Afghan people? Lots of questions still.
Absolutely. These are the things we'll need to keep watching, how this relationship evolves, how other countries react.
It leaves you wondering, doesn't it, as we watch all this unfold in this big, complicated game of geopolitics, who really benefits in the end? And maybe more importantly, whose voices, whose concerns get drowned out by the maneuvers of powerful states?
A sobering thought to end on.